She's here.
Well, I'm sure we'll start in a minute on that.
No,
Yeah.
Camden.
We'll start
Or
with
just
conversation.
select
I'm
some.
glad that, yeah, I was gonna say, I'm glad we have another chance.
All right, Jake, we're good to go.
All right, thanks everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. Rather than doing full roll call, I'll just note those commissioners who are present. So we've got Commissioner Byers, Gamage, and Reuter. All else are absent today, unfortunately. We'll move to approve the agenda. We've got two regular items. Does anyone on the commission have any comments on the agenda? Or would anyone like to move to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as is.
I have a question. Do you have enough people to make the quorum? Because you don't have majority here, you don't have 4 people.
We do have a
Yes,
separate
sir,
one.
we do have 4.
You do?
Yes,
How many people is the quorum?
4.
4?
Mhm.
Not number 4 is the quorum?
No, ma'am, we have a quorum, 4.
I don't think so. I'm not commissioner as well. I just feel you don't
Yeah,
have.
the commissioner is oversized right now because they merged, so 4 of 7 is a quorum.
Yeah, but you have 9 here.
Because it's oversized right now, but it's still 4 is a quorum.
Okay, so because you talk about justice, I was wondering if you actually following the law or not. That's okay. Because, if you don't have quorum, this long, the meeting is invalid.
Please continue.
Thank you. So we had a movement to approve the agenda. Did we get a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Unanimous. All right, so agenda's approved. I'll ask for brief announcements. We don't have a liaison from the council today. Staff, Stan, do you have any announcements you'd like to lead us off with?
No announcements at this time.
Thank you. Any announcements from commissioners today? Great. Moving along, we do now have a moment for public comment too. So this opportunity for public comment is anyone from the public who would like to speak on something that's not on the agenda can approach the dais, and we will also have opportunities to comment on each of the regular items to come as well. So I'll open the public comment. But seeing none, we'll close the public comment period. Again, we'll have additional chances for each of these items, and we can move on to the regular item, first of which is a presentation on the Climate Ready tree list.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully everyone got a chance to read the staff report that was provided. I'm going to do a pretty brief synopsis of it. And honestly, it is a pretty brief synopsis of everything that we kind of did during this process. But yeah, so the Climate Ready Tree Species List was created to replace the previously called Master Tree List for the City of Davis. It was released on Arbor Day of this year, which we did a tree planting event with Tree Davis on April 5th. And it was kind of what we've been calling a soft launch, which kind of got it out there and allowed people to look at it and comment from anything about species they may have questions about to words that we wrongly italicized. But we've been working through a lot of those comments and working to finalize a new product. And I'm just kind of going to go through the process and kind of what we did today, and then kind of walk everybody through what was finally produced. So the last time the city's master tree list was updated was in December of 21. This was a list that had been updated every couple of years, but really the way that that process entailed, presumably in Davis as well as every other city that I've ever worked with, was you had a list and every couple of years you would revisit and go, oh, this species isn't doing well anymore. or we know that there is a new pest that is coming that is going to annihilate this species, so let's not plant that. Our neighbor Bob had planted a tree a couple of years ago, this species that we don't have on the list and has been doing really well, maybe we should look at that. So it was this one-off, one-on kind of mentality. That left the city of Davis with a list of about 45 tree species. With some of them most of them doing well in our current climate, but whether or not they would do well in our projected climate in 50 and 100 years is a different question. So when I first got to town about 3 years ago, I was looking at this list, and I think to the tree commission, I may have mentioned this, I mentioned it to a lot of people in the first couple of months here. I didn't understand the way that the list was set up. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me. It wasn't alphabetical, it wasn't by height, and I finally realized that it was created via canopy width. And the reason for that was, I believe the intended use at the end of it was for parking lot shade calculations, meaning that when developers needed to put parking lots in, they could go simply to this list and pull very quickly, oh, well, this will help us meet those calculations. That's great for them, but not anybody else. It's really not a nice way to format it for the general public. So we took all these kinds of things into consideration as we were working through this. That original list had quite a few, but not, I would argue, the greatest characteristics provided in terms of making a decision of which tree was great for you. I mentioned things like flowers, whether or not it was evergreen, and then suitability for street and parking lots. So what we really wanted to do is kind of broaden the characteristics of trees that folks could take into consideration when picking the appropriate species that they would want to plant potentially in their yards, or as part of a development in a parking lot. So the major goal of the Climate Ready Tree Species list was diversity, looking at climate change and our projected climates and figuring out how we could introduce as many species that we believed would do well, not only in our current climate, but in our future climate. So I worked with, and the city worked with, a large group of folks that I'll run off here in a second, but really the number one person I worked with at the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Gardens is Emily Griswold, who is actually here today. And I just wanted to give a special thanks to her because this was a project that took well over 2 years. And me and Emily met essentially every other week, one-on-one, and then multiple times with a larger group to put this work together. And Emily really did a lot of the data analysis and data curation through this process. So I did want to give her a quick shout out. But other folks that we worked with, because this was a big thing that came up in the tree commission regularly, is why is the city not working with the experts? We have so many amazing people who are researchers at the university. We have individuals at the state level. We have local folks that are world renowned locally. So we did include folks from CAL FIRE, Tree Davis, UCA&R, the Master Gardeners, the U.S. Forest Service, Don Shore from Redwood Barn, and several others, and reached out to even more. We reached out to folks from Woodland and Sacramento to get them engaged, because the goal here was not just to make a list for Davis, but for the region. I mean, our climate is going to be very similar to that of Sacramento and Woodland and Dixon and all those areas. So the hope here is that we've created a model that can be replicated in other areas, and hopefully our list can be utilized in other areas with similar climates. And there's also multiple professors from UC Davis that kind of reached out and helped in this process. So this by no means was just myself sitting in a room going, hey, this is the tree that I think we should plant. Another major goal in this effort was to make a user-friendly tree species list. So again, not looking at, oh, this person needs it for parking lot shade. So as we go through this process, realize that we've created multiple lists for different location types, We've created an online that we'll walk through at the end of this presentation list so that it's much more usable with links to different subject matters and pictures and all those kinds of things. So the goal is to make it user-friendly for everyone involved. We do have printable location lists for 2 of them that I'll talk about a little bit later. But really the goal is to drive people online because there's so much more data you can provide to people online rather than a one-page printout. Through this process, we ended up with 183 trees on our overall list. So going from 45 to 183 is quite a dramatic jump. And I would wager if you looked at every other every other city's tree species list and how many they add each year, I can guarantee you it's not 140. So we've drastically changed what we're kind of looking at in that way. So pushing climate ready, this is not the first time we've talked about it. It's not the first time we've started to utilize it. The city of Davis has been planting climate ready tree species for the better part of a decade. But in small doses, we've utilized research from the U.S. Forest Service and other places. Like U.S. Forest Service has a study going on with UCD for about a dozen species, which is great. We utilize those. Those are the trees that we utilize as part of the Prop 68,000 trees that we planted. But again, that's only 10, so or a dozen. You got to continually expand what you're looking at in terms of types of trees. So knowing that climate change disproportionately impacts urban trees, but also that urban trees play a crucial role in mitigating climate change, we really set to utilize a data-driven, and again, ideally replicable climate-ready tree species list. So the factors that we considered were evaluating climate modeling, which is basically what will our climate be, and how well are past species going to thrive in that climate and what future species can kind of do well. Identifying promising tree species, so what trees thrive in our projected climate, and looking at similar climates, or places that have similar climates to our projected climate and seeing what species potentially could do well here. Developing a tree species scoring criteria, what are the important attributes that we consider for making a tree climate ready for our site. And then selecting climate ready tree species, so basically rating the trees based off of these attributes. And that's where this working group really kind of came in and helped when we didn't have data, or if we did have data and we wanted to go against what arguably the data said based off of experience. And then creating a recommended species by planting this location. So this becomes very key and instrumental in our final phase, which is the outreach engagement with others. So again, you can have a parking lot list for the developer that needs parking lot shade calculations, but you can also have a list for somebody's front and backyards. So the first thing that I mentioned was evaluating the climate modeling. So utilizing Climate Toolbox to assess, again, both current and projected climates for Davis at 2050 and 2100, which was a really weird year to type, but getting used to it. So some of this modeling has projected Davis to have a climate similar to Bakersfield by 2050 and potentially Tucson by 2100. So immediately go, oh, well, let's just grab the species from that and add them to our list. The issue is that Davis has received a frost before, and we have different weather patterns try to rain, and then Tucson might get a lot of rain in a certain time. So we definitely looked at those species, but again, went through this whole data-driven approach to just not say, yes, let's just add all those trees. Identifying promising tree species. So again, looking at climates similar to Davis, so Bakersfield or Tucson, looking into the Southwest. But we opened it up essentially globally. And one of the interesting things that I had never really thought about until it was mentioned in this process is like, oh, well, Davis is the opposite latitude of Santiago, Chile. So does that mean that those species might do well? So again, it's this outside the box thinking of like, where can we look at species and potentially introduce some of them. And so it's not to say, yes, they will because we're on the same latitude, because of different weather patterns based off of the oceans and the mountains, etc. But it's just giving us ideas on where to look and pull species and potentially run them through this matrix. We evaluated approximately 350 trees in this entire process, ranging from anywhere from the southwest of the US to the Mediterranean, to the Middle East, including places like South America, Australia, and Asia. So from there, we were basically developing a tree species scoring criteria. What are the minimum qualifications for us to determine that a tree would do well in our future climate? So the main things that we considered were heat tolerance, cold tolerance, drought tolerance, invasiveness, pest and disease threats, and branch strength. The last one's a little out there, but it plays a kind of important role in an urban environment in determining especially where you would potentially plant a tree. So those are the things that we tried to consider as the bare minimum qualifications. So this required the use of back-end data from a multitude of sources, but I will say a major source, and give another shout out to Dr. Matt Ritter's Select Tree program. This is a website that I became familiar with my time here and have had the opportunity to meet Dr. Ritter. It's a wonderful website, and honestly, it's kind of the data on it is basically the backbone of our entire project here. And we utilize that website as the links for additional information on basically every species that we have on our online list. So putting the species through this scoring criteria, we basically graded it yes, no, and possible based off of its relationship in surviving Davis's future climate. And if a species received a hard no on any of the 6 variables, essentially didn't pass through the matrix. However, there are a few where we pulled out and we had an in-depth conversation within the working group on whether or not we would pass it through. So a couple of those, for example, would be the California sycamore, which has a very bad anthracnose problem, so I got a no in the pest and disease, but we felt that it wasn't completely debilitating, so we allowed that through. Another one that folks may not want to hear, but I'll put it out there, is the valley oak. That one did not, or if it did, it barely passed through our matrix because there are several different pests and diseases on the outskirts of Davis that could really cause some serious damage. So we did pass it through onto our list, but it is a very important concern that we noted throughout this process. It's on the website if you read through on the valley oak. It really harps on the concerns of these different species that can be not only detrimental but deadly to the species as a whole. I think as a group we're probably going to be planting a bit less of them just because we want to see what's happening. But we again we left it on the list just because we felt it's an important species. But again, making sure that we're using those reservations and sharing them with the public. The next was selecting climate-ready tree species. So basically, coming through with the matrix, they came out completely unscathed. They ended up as recommended. And then others ended up with recommended with reservations for things like diseases that might not necessarily kill the tree but could be problematic. A big one might be like aphids, which we constantly get calls about. So there's a few different species like hackberries and crepe myrtles that have a very bad aphid problem. So it's again, the tree will survive in the climate change projected models, but I don't want to just say, go plant a crepe myrtle everywhere, because you're going to get mad at me if you plant it right next to your driveway or along the sidewalk. So again, these reservations, these concerns are what we tried to share in the notes section of this list online. And so we had recommended with reservation and then recommended with reservation to the mid-century. So those are 2 delineations. One can handle the projected climate up to 2100, the other is to 2050. Which isn't a problem for species that aren't super long-lived. If you're going to plant, like for example, the valley oak was to recommend it with reservation to the mid-century, or projecting it to live 200 years, probably wouldn't have made the list. So just things to consider as people look at this list and try to decide which species makes the most sense for them. Then we had experimental, and then maybe experimental to mid-century. These are species that we either could not track down all the data sets to let it run through the matrix because we just didn't have enough information, whether it's from another country or there just wasn't enough experience with the tree. So there are species that made it through, but then as we went through it as part of the working group, and we said, well, who has experience with this tree? Nobody raised their hand. So it's like, all right, let's put that on the experimental list. So the goal there is to look at this list and in years to come, hopefully tap into it as we learn more about these species or get better data sets, or if we can find it in a nursery somewhere, maybe planting it somewhere that we can keep an eye on it and see how well it does, kind of thing. But we do, again, we have 183 trees that are in our recommended with reservations list, so we have enough that we can kind of push forward and try to get out there. So in the recommended with reservation, we had 183 tree species that made it through. We had 95 that put it on the experimental list, and then we had 71 that ended up with the not recommended. This list does not include all the trees that you think it would. So we did not, for example, put the redwood through our climate ready matrix because we know it's not conducive to our current climate, so it surely won't be conducive to our long-term climate. So one of the next steps is to make this do not plant list essentially, which is these species that we know don't do well now, but may be on our current, or in our current urban tree canopy. So it might be in our inventory, but not something that we would plant now. And a key note that I want to make is just because we're not planting it now doesn't mean it can't thrive or that it should be removed. I know this thing comes up regularly during the tree commission. If I had a tree brought or appealed to council, I would always get asked, well, are we planting this tree now? No, but that does not mean that this tree cannot thrive, and it does not mean that we should remove the tree just because we're not planting it now. It still has a lot of value, it's just not one that we would continue to plant, because again, we're not looking at a tree for tomorrow, we're looking for it for 20, 50, 100 years from now. So, based off of our 183 trees that ended up in our recommended with reservation list, we set to create essentially 7 different location lists. So just because the tree may end up on our recommended list, it does not mean that you can plant it anywhere. So the 7 different locations are basically streetscapes and large parking lot planting areas, confined planting spaces or growing areas, general landscaping with irrigation and general landscaping without, large stormwater planting detention areas, small stormwater planting detention areas, and then habitat restoration. These were somewhat derived from a similar process that happened in Albuquerque that we kind of modeled a lot of the stuff that we did after. And I will say that the habitat restoration location is really important because it is where a lot of the native trees from the Sacramento Valley, Davis area ended up. And there are a multitude of reasons for that. I would say the biggest one is if Davis was not here as a town, all the trees would be growing in the riparian areas and nowhere else because we're in the valley. So that being said, that's their native area or natural area. So it would make sense that you don't want to put a box elder on your street because it doesn't grow super straight or well. It can break off pretty easily. But I think all those species are so important to our ecosystem. So it's not to say don't plant them. It's like be aware that if you do plant them, these are the areas that it would thrive. So to kind of wrap this up before I kind of walk through exactly what we produced, the main goal, well, there's several main goals of this process and project. One was really focusing for the future and taking climate change truly into consideration as we're trying to create a very vast and diverse list so that our urban tree canopy can really grow, not just physically growing, but within its diversity. And so in our urban forest management plan, it looked at a breakdown of different species, and honestly, Davis has a pretty decent diversity of species, but if you look at, I think, the top 10 species breakdown, the first 4 are on our climate ready tree species list, so that's great, but the next 5 are not. So I think those 5 make up a little under, maybe around 20% of our canopy. And that's not saying all the trees that are in our canopy, but so they're just in the top 10 species, 20% of the canopy are on trees that are not going to do well in now 25 years and 75 years. So it's important for us to really look at expanding the options that folks like Tree Davis and the city have when we're looking at planting trees. 1 for outreach and 2 for education around climate change, as well as just offering a plethora of options for tree planting. The real hope, though, being that this list will really push the demand for trees that might not normally be planted, which then in turn can hopefully push up the supply. So some of the species, and I'll show you guys on the website, are listed as rare. And that rare list is because, and God bless Don Shore and his nurseryman capacity, basically told us, you can't find this. Great tree, but if you are looking for a tree in your yard, you're gonna be very hard pressed to find this species. But we didn't want to leave it out, because that tree still can do well, it just is hard to find. So the hope is, putting it on the list is the first step to have people start to ask nurseries. And once nurseries start getting asked a couple of times, all of a sudden they start growing it. In my time in Baltimore, we literally would have nurseries call us and ask for our list so that they knew what to grow. So that's kind of the goal here is like, people could look at Davis last year and go, oh, these are the 45 trees I need to grow. And now they go, oh, hold on, I gotta figure out how I can grow 183 different species. So, not to say that's gonna happen tomorrow, but it is, I think, a really important first step in changing that supply based off of demand. So, this has been an incredible project. It's honestly been my favorite thing that I've worked on in my 3 years here. So, I will walk you through very briefly kind of what it looks like. So this is one of the printed PDFs. So we printed out 2. One is for landscape areas, which is basically what we call the home yard, essentially, location, and one is for no irrigation, which is the one I have pulled up here. And then the other that I'll show you in a second is for yards with irrigation. And it might sound counterintuitive to say, hey, climate change, drought, etc., why are we recommending trees that need irrigation? Again, this looked at specifically whether or not it could survive within climate change, right? So water is one of those important factors, but it's not the only limiting factor. So our goal with outreach is to really push the list that has low or no irrigation requirements. But we didn't want to just exclude, but this is the one for regular irrigation, all these trees that could make it through climate change with irrigation. Also, how many people have irrigation yards in Davis? You don't want to say, hey, here's our recommended list, it can't handle irrigation, I can't plant a tree in my yard because my yard has irrigation. So it is this kind of catch-22 of educating people based off of the need to go without irrigation, but also realize that it's going to be a slow transition. So providing trees that can handle climate change and irrigation. So these are both printable. We had them out at the Arbor Day event. You can print out the PDF at home. The one is a 11 by 17 double-sided that you can kind of fold like a menu. The other is just 8.5 by 11, both sides. But yeah, we will be having these at all tabling events. Tree Davis has them as well. But I think the really, really cool and fun thing is that we have it on our website. So the website is, and I will point out before I drive you guys to the website, is that this QR code takes you to the website. And it's very important, and within the information that is provided here, basically it says, this is a list, but please go to the website, because just because the tree is on here doesn't mean it's gonna be the perfect tree for you. We try to give basic information, but really pushing people to the website. So on the website, we can create these drop downs with additional notes for each species, and then we obviously have links over here that can take you to Select Tree, where you got a bunch of pictures and a ton of additional information. So within our efforts, all these notes are in a combination of dozens of meetings with this working group and people's experiences. So a lot of this might have like localized like Davis information in it. So it's really to just give the end user as much information as possible before selecting the appropriate tree for themselves. And we have all these little fun icons that our team created. And so, yeah, so we broke down again by size, divided by the different location types. So it's very possible that there are species replicated over different location sites, that they would do well in each location. The 2 PDFs I mentioned are down here at the website. We do have the other 5 locations coming online soon. We just wanted to get these ones out because these are the most public facing. These are the ones for people with yards that would be planting. The other ones are much more tied to developments and parking lots being built and things like that. The data exists, it's just creating it. And those will just be PDFs because we don't expect, I don't expect a landscape architect to be on our website like clicking around on different trees and going, I've never heard of this tree. It's possible, but very unlikely in the plans that I see in terms of developments. But it is very important for us to be able to say, you need to go look at our tree list, your species are not on there, we're not accepting those. So having those lists for folks will be very valuable. The end user just isn't the residents of Davis, and that's the ones that we have out currently. And I believe that is all I have for you all, so sorry for talking so long.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the presentation and bringing so much passion to this project. I'm excited for a conversation to follow. So the way this will flow is we'll do clarifying questions first, if there are any, open it up for public comment next, and then we will follow up with the commissioner discussion. Let's start to my right. Commissioner Ritter, do you have anything to start us off with? Any clarifying questions?
Yeah, and let me know whether we should save this question for the discussion part. For the rating system and the scoring system, I didn't happen to notice, I may have missed it. Is there information out on that? Like, is water tolerant weighted more heavily than other things? And how did you, and do those numbers exist someplace? And what was taken more into account or not?
Sure, great question. I was juggling how much information to give you all. So you should see Emily's Airtable for this thing. I think it's like, I don't know, like 60 columns long. It just went into double letters by a lot. We utilize a lot of different data sets to figure this out. And some of it's listed within the staff report here, but like the climate assessment tools, we're looking at like highs and lows of like the hardiness zones of trees. So looking at, again, first you're looking at climate, so our projected highs in 2050 and 2100 are these for X amount of period of time, and then lows potential of this. So then going into the tree species and looking at, okay, well, the cold hardiness zones for these species are this, the sunset range for our trees are this. So it's looking at so many different data sets and then running that through. Looking at WACLs for drought tolerance. I think the one that probably is the loosest and one of the most difficult ones for us to capture were invasiveness, because invasiveness is so location based. So people have talked about eucalyptus being super invasive in certain areas of California, and I won't disagree with them, but I would also say nothing truly I've seen invasive in Davis, because it's just so dry and hot, and the soil's not great for introducing species. You definitely see things pop up, but not to the level of something that would be called out by Cal IPM or something like that. So, but it's also, you don't want to be the person that introduces the species that takes over. So, again, where we didn't have really strong data sets, there's things like that. There's other things like pests and diseases, we have understandings of them, but like, will sudden oak death make it from the coast to Davis? Unlikely, but like, I can't say it won't. There's a couple of borers that we imagine, the Mediterranean oak borer, and the invasive shot-hole borer, that are down in San Jose or in Sacramento. Will they make it over here? I'd say pretty likely, but I can't guarantee that either. So a lot of things we had concrete data, like temperatures and drought conditions and water use or need. But others really, again, relied on this working group of folks to kind of go back and forth of like, well, I've seen it in this, well, I've seen it like this, well, can we meet somewhere in the middle? If not, then kind of put it into that experimental until we can.
So would you say that drought tolerance and high and low temperature were the main three? I mean, if you had to take a score and weight the score on level of importance,
Yeah.
would those three be the most important?
I would think heat and drought, and then cold will snuff out a couple of species that like maybe are like in Tucson or Bakersfield or something that just can't handle. But yeah, I would say drought and high temps are the main thing.
Okay, just a few more if I could. Tree Commission, we've been following this, so it's nice to hear what's actually come out, and it's really good. So, and did I understand you right, the planting locations which you had, you've got the two graphic web pages that talk about low irrigation and regular irrigation. And am I right in taking it to mean that for the other ones, like parking lots and habitat, natural habitat, and all wetlands, that those are in the works, but you just haven't had time to develop?
So those lists exist. They'll essentially become PDFs. I don't know that they'll be as pretty with pictures and stuff, because I think the end user for those, or a lot of that's going to be developers. But yeah, they'll have the notes. They'll have all the same information, and we have that. It's just within Public Works, we have a very small communications and outreach team that do like the Greener Davis newsletter and stuff, and so I had to focus on these two things. But yeah, the data for the PDFs for those are there, they just haven't been fully created to the,
That's
yeah.
good. Okay, great. Okay, no, that's really nice. Sort of just a curiosity question. How many species from the old list made it to the new list, or how many were bumped?
That's a great question. I would think, so of the 45, I actually thought about this right before I came over here. I was like, man, I should run through this real quick, and I didn't have enough time. So I would wager at least 40 of them, because again, they were removing trees that were no longer projected to be decent growing, which arguably sets up to be exactly what this list was kind of doing, but like without the data. Like I think the last iteration removed a bunch of ash and things like that, which is like, oh yeah, we have emerald ash borer that isn't anywhere near us, but we'll end up here at some point.
Okay, one more, and then I'll save the rest of the discussion. There's as part of our commission combination, the city appointed a special committee, if you will, to evaluate tree removal requests. Okay. I don't know if you could even comment on this, but if there are trees, like you said, there are trees that are planted now that wouldn't have been on that list, given what's coming. Do you think that committee would be more inclined to approve of their removal as long as they're replaced by something on there? Meaning, they probably wouldn't be allowed now anyway, and the less time best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago. So do you think the group would be more inclined to say, yeah, let's remove it now ASAP and replace it?
So I think it's probably kind of a spectrum. So some species are like, get them out now, and others are, they're fine. I mean, the biggest thing with trees, especially with climate and drought, is have they made it to a level where they don't need additional watering? So if the tree is large and surviving on its own, then no. I think it is an important factor to consider. I don't know that it should be a deciding factor. Also, I think the bigger factor tied to that is that a lot of times those species are planted in a non-diverse makeup of a neighborhood. So looking at that and going, okay, I just had a meeting a month or so ago about, it was just a single block, and the only tree on that block were locusts that were all planted at the same time. So none of them are dying, but they all look not great. And so you either wait 10 years or 20 years and you remove all of them at once, or you go, okay, well, these are the two worst looking ones, can we start to phase them out? So I think it's more that than I would say, oh, this is a locust, this isn't a great tree, we should remove it. It's more of looking at the bigger picture of a block or a neighborhood and going, there's a lot of the same species that isn't great, let's start phasing them out.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll save anything else for later. Thanks.
Thank you, great questions. Commissioner Kamash, would you like to ask any clarifying questions?
It's all right.
I'm really grateful for your report. It's wonderful to hear that. I've been looking forward to it for a while, so thank you so much. I know how much effort you took to do all that, and being part of the tree commission since November. I have a lot to share in terms of my perspective as an Indigenous scholar. I'm not a traditional I'm not an expert in traditional ecological knowledge by any means, but I do have a sense of what that scholarship looks like and how it's developed over the past 30 years. So I want to share what I know. There's going to be a lot of gaps and a lot of open questions and room for further exploration. And I have a lot of little sticky notes to bear with me here. So let's see where I'm at. Okay, so I guess I'll start by introducing a Quechua term, which is Kausai Sacha. That's an indigenous language from Ecuador, the Quechua or Ecuadorian group. And Kausai Sacha means honoring the living forest or the living jungle. Okay, and the understanding with that concept is that trees are in ecosystemic relationships, which are sentient to a certain degree, which means they are aware of the climate changes, and they're also doing their part to adapt and thrive to those changes as a system. And so the indigenous approach is to consider how the system is already adapting and already making these changes, and then figuring out how to enhance the system in certain ways. And that's how they've approached land tending for a very long time. And this approach is called relational ecosystemic tending and restoration models. There's models for these things. And it's under the umbrella of traditional ecological knowledge, which is contained within the indigenous languages themselves. The biggest barrier has been that they've been contained in indigenous languages that have been unknown to mainstream society, and so the challenge for a scholar is to translate them into English and Spanish and get them into university systems. So that's kind of a big part of the work that I am in support of doing outside of here. So now let's see. Okay, so there's that. So here's something that I wanted to add. Well, something you considered was the pests and the diseases that can come to damage the trees after you plant them, right? And that's an open research question. We don't really know what's going to happen when you do that, when you introduce a non-native species to this ecological system. But one thing to consider is not only the pests and diseases that could affect the life of the tree once it's planted here, but also the co-ecosystemic support and biophilic complements that the tree is used to living around. So for example, trees have a certain type of bacteria, they have a certain type of rhizome networks, they attract certain insects, which attract other types of animals, that creates habitat, right? And the habitat that's created by these animals actually supports the life of the tree, right? So if we take a tree from somewhere around the world, we plant it here, but there aren't the birds, there aren't the insects, there aren't all the other things that it needs to feel happy, it's not going to be happy here. So that might mean to also bring those animals here. But then that also has a lot of complication because there are already animals here and they might not get along. A lot of interesting research can happen from all that, I'm sure. So those are just some of my non-expert understanding of this area where there's people that are like, they've spent their whole life knowing this stuff. So now, let's see, I'm all disorganized, let's see if I include everything, cover that one.
And Commissioner Gamage, just a reminder, this time was intended for kind of clarifying questions. We will have like a larger discussion afterwards too.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So should I finish? I'm almost done, but
if you wouldn't mind holding on, we'll
Yes.
come back, we'll start with you and pick up right where we left
Okay.
off. But if you have any clarifying questions from the presentation or any thoughts that you will share, happy to stay here for a moment too.
I think I have a lot to share. I don't have questions right now, so I will continue sharing a bit. Sorry for not paying attention to the order of things.
That's okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, thank you so much. And Commissioner Bax, any clarifying questions?
I think this is a clarifying question, I'm not quite sure how to categorize it, but I heard a lot of discussion about water and location of trees. And I also heard you say that there was a long spreadsheet, so anyways, my curiosity is about soil type, because, for instance, my clarifying question is, did you consider it? Is it in that framework? That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, so absolutely, when looking at locations, potential for new species, we were definitely taking that into consideration. Now, that's not to say, especially in urban environments, it becomes very complicated. So like, you can look at what the soil maps say for Davis, but then if you're planting in front of Woodstocks downtown, that's not the soil in the tree well, right? So, yes, absolutely, we looked at that, but I wouldn't say it's an absolute deciding factor. It is probably one of those factors that helped us narrow down where we were looking for trees, but not necessarily excluding specific species.
Thank you. I think I guess one question I have, so you mentioned that this is like you're kind of seeing this as a regional model, and I love that idea. Do you have any particular plans for kind of like an outreach to put it out to like other cities, the counties around that you could share with us?
So currently, no. I think currently our big efforts with True Davis and the working group is how to get the word out internally within Davis. But I do believe that within that, again, the working group does extend to other cities. I'm sure we'll send this over to Sacramento and other cities in the valley to say, hey, we've created this, take a look, if you're interested, we're happy to talk. I do believe, and whether Emily is aware of this or not, I'm probably going to harp on her to present this at some conferences at some point, because I do think it is, again, replicable. So not just for this area, but taking kind of what was created in Emily's brainchild and just kind of pushing it out and doing it in other areas, just looking at their climates and doing the exact same thing. So I do think with that kind of notoriety, you end up getting folks like Sacramento that may not pay attention to Little Davis. But all of a sudden, if it's being talked about at a conference, they might, so. Yeah, it's on the back burner, but it's definitely something we're thinking about.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I see what you mean. You gotta focus on getting it out and operating here before you start
Yeah.
bragging about it. My other question, and hopefully this doesn't break the rules too much, I just wanted to extend the question and ask, is it Emily, sorry, if you have anything you'd like to add, if you'd like to maybe approach the dais and add anything. I know we've had a long presentation, but I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts here too.
Hi there, my name is Emily Griswold. I am the Director of Gateways Horticulture and Teaching Gardens for the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden. And I'm here just partly because I'm so excited that this is finally like reaching beyond our little working group, because we have been working on this for quite a long time. And I just want to thank Charlie for being an exceptional partner in this activity. So I've been wanting to work on something like this for a while, and I needed a partner to help propel it forward. And so anyway, I want to acknowledge Charlie for helping to move it forward. So it's been a great partnership, and it's great to hear your questions, and I am thinking about how we can continue to improve this and share the word more widely. I'm involved more in like botanic garden networks, and so I've been sharing some information about this process with other botanic gardens as a model for how botanic gardens can assist in climate adaptation efforts in their communities. So mainly I just want to thank you all for your feedback, and thank Charlie for his great work on this, and happy to answer any other questions that you all have if Charlie can't answer them.
Can I just make a point on what you were saying? It's sort of that whole thing, you're never a prophet in your own land, right? And there's a lot of things, especially Davis and a lot of other places around the world, that there's a lot of really innovative, cutting-edge things going on, okay? If you don't go to a lot of conferences, I had the opportunity to go to a lot in my career, and you don't find out about these things, that people are doing great jobs at it, right? I think this is a fantastic job. I mean, I can't even imagine what a consultant would have charged to do this work, okay? A lot of bucks, let's be honest, right? And they might not even have done it as well as you all did. So this is a little labor of love, and Emily, it sounds like it's a true labor of love for you. So I'm wondering, with the partnership with UC Davis and the DANR, this might get some airtime with them, and they might be able to sort of help push this out, okay? I think that, in this area, Dixon and Esparto and Sacramento, Rockland, it's great because, I mean, they are similar in environments, but I think the concept on a lot of these things is equally as important. And so you go to meetings and you find, well, somebody's taking this approach. It may not be in the environment that you're studying, but it's the approach that they take. It's the thought process, it's the care, it's the consideration of, I never thought about that we might be able to take something like that. So I think it's good to also think beyond just what's going on just around us. Because a lot of groups can learn a lot just from all, the partnerships you've established, the way you've gone about doing it, the data that you use, the modeling. And so I think that process really has a lot of potential for other places.
So, yeah, absolutely. I think one of our big hopes is that CAL FIRE, being a partner in the working group, is that they will be able to kind of spread that. But yes, absolutely. Everyone I've ever talked to in any sort of passing or meeting in the forestry field since we've started this project is like, hit me up when you're done. I want to hear about it. So it definitely has legs. It just, the resources and legs to give it are just, I think, again, focusing heavily on getting it out within Davis
as a usable tool, and then figuring out how to spread the word.
Well, you know, we never want to do self-promotion in this type of area, but it's important. It's really important to do. You know, it's part of the educational aspect of what we do. You know, so it's just not showing everybody how great we are here, but it's educating people, making people think sort of outside the box. You know? So anyway, yeah. So Emily, maybe your next article, science paper could be on this, you know, Journal of Environmental Planning or something to that effect. You know? So, great guys, nice job.
Thank you. And so with that, I'll end the clarifying question section, which allows us to open up the public comment period for this item. Then we'll move on to general discussion. So if any members of the public would like to come up, approach the dais and speak on this item.
Yeah.
Very well. And please introduce yourself and then begin with your comments.
Hello. So my name is Kafir. I'm a third-year computer science major and climate science and policy minor at UC Davis. And I saw Jake a few weeks ago, and I'm glad to see him again here. I'm representing a class of CRD 149. It's the class on environmental justice, and we're helping to inform the consultants working on the general plan of 2027, specifically on the environmental justice side. And so what my class has been doing, what I've been doing, is helping to run focus groups, people specifically in affordable housing, and how that intersects with Davis and with environmental justice. So I want to give a few comments on the great work done by Charles and Emily on how this kind of relates to climate and environmental justice. So this is all done right now as you guys are talking, so it's not the most professional, but basically what I've been thinking about is how this work ties into the climate justice section of this commission. And so what I've been thinking about is, we're having a lot of these trees be for climate readiness. And my question is, well, climate readiness for whom? I think that trees have a valid purpose, but their purpose changes and is different for different people. And so if you have a house, or if you're a student, or if you have a disability, your experience with trees, even though they might be climate ready, they might be very different. And so one example in our focus groups that we ran, a lot of disabled people had issues with olive trees, which are climate ready, at least some of them in the list, that they would often slip on them. They kind of fall into that maintenance. And so even if the tree is climate ready, if it's not taken care of, it's not a place where people have the resources to manage that system, it's going to actually be a net negative for people in that community. So let's keep in mind who is living nearby. And if you're unhoused as well, your experience with the trees are going to be very different. You still have a home to reside, you have that safe place. So I think that you should also consider those factors aside from just the growing conditions themselves. And then I guess my other issue, which might be raised in this next section, was like how the trees connect with other sections mentioned in previous months. And so my concern with the previous agendas is there's very little emphasis on environmental justice. I know that the next half of this will be on the draft report, but looking at previous months, there's a lot of focus on like waste and pest management and like just general election stuff, as opposed to how do we address the systemic barriers that people are facing with regards to climate, with regards to environmental justice, specifically for disabled people, for elderly people, also considers pollen as a climate readiness thing, like a lot of pollen allergies here, we're not thinking about that, at least not from what I've seen so far. So these considerations of going beyond just what is abstract climate ready, but what is actually going to serve our communities the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public commenters? Thank you so much. We'll close the public comment period and kind of move to discussion, which I know kind of bled into our last section. But Commissioner Kamaj, can we go back to you so we can pick up that item? And apologies again for cutting you off there.
No worries. It's helpful to know what the right timing is to speak about things, and I wasn't mindful of that. So I wanted to ask, I know that the Patwin people were people that stewarded these lands ancestrally, and there was another group as well, and I should know it, but it's slipping my mind, and I don't know if anyone else remembers. Like, there are land acknowledgements for Davis, right? I don't know, but no, okay. I'll have to look it up. That should be something that I should know.
I mean, there are 3 federally recognized tribes in this region. The Kachel-Diki, the Quetzal-Diki, and the Yoche-Diki, the 2 nations.
Okay, wonderful, yeah. Thank you for that. So I'm not familiar with those names in terms of whether they have like up and running traditional ecological knowledge programs yet. The person I know that has the most established program is in Chico. She's from the Mashuda tribe, and she does oftentimes comes to Davis and gives conferences and talks and whatnot. I think what I would like to do is talk about a potential motion that we as a council can consider. I don't know whether, I want to just bring up this as a potential motion and not actually declare a motion yet, but this is what I wrote, but I'm open to brainstorming it further. So this is my motion. To establish a traditional ecologic knowledge research stewardship program, to partner city planning with Indigenous scholars and land tenure practitioners in order to give them a place at the planning table to be part of the long-term plan for the urban forest of Davis and the surrounding regions. And that's what I wrote. So we can have a conversation about that, I guess. It's up to the chair in terms of how we want to go there.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that and learn a little bit more about, or kind of think through, how the best way to approach that would be. Would that be something that you would like to kind of, so I know you mentioned as a motion now, would that be something that you'd like to kind of like have as like a meeting topic, for instance, where we can really try to like flesh it out, look at how it can integrate into the urban forest plan, or do you think that's something that we could have a real strong conversation about today?
I think in terms of what I heard from the report, this is the support that I think I could provide to enhance the report and enhance the work moving forward. So I think this particular motion is very related to today's report. In terms of how to actually establish this as a motion and or a program and or a partnership and all those things, I think that's a much more involved conversation. So maybe we can have a motion to begin that conversation. And then I have to do my part of the research too, because my research work is from my people in Quechua, or in Ecuador, so my knowledge of local indigenous ancestral knowledge isn't I'm not an expert at that, but I can do my work too to learn about that.
This is also, it seems to me, if I'm understanding you right, falls a lot under the environmental justice category. And so I would prefer to maybe have that motion made once we have that discussion. I think it would be good for me to understand, because that is part of environmental justice. So to have that discussion, I think, would help me to be able to give any of those.
Yeah, I'd love to revisit that for that conversation as well. Yeah.
I guess, can I maybe take what you're talking about and frame it as a question to you? Have you partnered already with some of the local tribes?
So during the urban forest management plan, we reached out a multitude of times to get their involvement and couldn't even receive a statement. The language we used as part of the plan, I think in the history of Davis, there's a section that talks about the history tied to the tribes. We actually had to utilize language that they had pre-approved for a different project because we couldn't even get a response for them to respond to the type of language we were trying to utilize in the history. So we've attempted, but have fallen short of getting true engagement. I think it would be wonderful, but I think with limited resources within urban forestry, it's only so much that we can do in terms of outreach before we kind of have to move forward on things.
So a follow-up question then, you're with Public Works, right? And so does Public Works have any kind of tribal relations person?
We work through the city manager's office that has those connections.
Okay,
Yeah, tribal relations are through CMO.
okay.
So if a different department needs some of that interaction or attempt to have that interaction and relationship, it would go through CMO.
So that has happened then the
Yeah.
attempt has been made through the CMO?
That was the attempt that was made with the urban forest management plan, yes.
Okay. I know tribes are feeling probably pressed from a lot of different places right now. So some of it takes relationship building, like we have to have a relationship with them for them to, to decide that they have the bandwidth to help us and that this is a priority for them. So, some kind of a partnership is probably ideal, so I don't know how to make that happen, but that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can add that in terms of what Indigenous people are, they're also very actively engaged in being climate ready themselves in their communities, and they would benefit a lot from sharing their information, sharing what they know, and also partnering with the surrounding regions for their own communities. And in terms of whether they actually have a traditional ecological knowledge program as part of their work, that there's very few tribes that actually have that level of organization yet. Not to say that they're not all striving for that. And it does take quite a bit of scholarship and research work to get one of those programs off the ground, and funding. So part of that conversation is also, I think, in terms of looking at regional partners like the Mashuda tribe in Chico, even though they're not immediately close to Davis, they might be the closest TEK program, and they would have a lot of great ideas for how to establish relationships and all these things. In terms of relationship building, I think that's important as a thing all its own, and then at the same time, the tribes are in the Davis region, they just might not be at the point of scholarship for themselves to contribute in this way, and I just don't know. I don't know where they're at.
I have a tiny bit of knowledge that's probably a little bit old, but I know that the community development program, actually, that some of the professors there have relationships with the Yochadiji tribe, and that they also work with, you may know this, with the, I'm trying to remember, it's out there it's in, what's that name of that preserve that's on the way out there? Anyways, they do have some connections with some of our local preserve nature-based program stuff. So I think it's just a matter of finding the right people and the right connections. So.
Would it make sense to maybe consider discussing whether a committee or a subcommittee be formed to look into what the goals might be of such an exercise?
I would suggest you're getting a bit far afield from the topic at hand, I believe. I think there's enough here that I think your suggestion of putting it on a future agenda makes sense. Because you're also getting to a point where this motion would enact, or basically look to enact, resources from the city to do, which is something the council has to put forth, not the commission. So I think there's a lot here that is worth discussing, but I think it would be, to your point, a future agenda would make a lot of sense.
I think one benefit of making it like an agenda item or perhaps a subcommittee to explore it a little bit is that then we could use that to touch other projects as well that will come before us. And so it's, rather than it being kind of like a one-off touch point for this particular project or just the urban forest plan, it can maybe build a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, I think I just needed to share what was present for me in the moment, and I wasn't sure exactly how to approach it. I think, like Stan was saying, it would need to be an advisory. We would need to give city council advice to move forward with a program, but we could do our job maybe through a subcommittee to outline what a program should look like and do our research first, so that way when the city council receives the advice, it's like actionable for them to say yes. Usually it's no, because the resource required to develop something is just too complex. But if we show how easy it could be, and then the resource intensity of that goes down. But that's on the subcommittee to figure out, I think, to give good advice, which is a much longer project.
Yeah, one I would be excited about though too. So maybe we can revisit that during the long range calendar portion of the meeting later today.
Can I ask one more clarifying question? So you brought this as an informational item, just for discussion, but can you explain a little bit more about how far along it is and how much flexibility it has from, going forward?
The list in general? Yeah,
the list,
sure.
Programs.
So, the goal of this list is that it is a living document. In fact, a perfect example of that is that it was literally already released and it's already been updated. So, it's been less than a month. So, I think the goal, especially with it living online, is to, again, I think the next step is really to get out there in front of the community, get the word out, have people come to us. I mean, we released it on April 5th, and literally at the tree planting event, I had people come, why is this tree on there? I don't know about this tree, why about this? And so, I think that's the goal, right, is to drive conversation, to drive dialogue. And one of the things that I'm working on now is what does the policy around the updating of this look like? So I don't think the goal is ever to go back to the way that it was, which is a couple of people sitting in a room going like, have we had any luck with this tree? No, let's take it off the list. I think the goal here is to create a process in which anybody and everybody can say, hey, I don't like this species, or how come this species isn't on it? And if that species hasn't gone through the matrix, it's like, well, we're gonna create a list. And then when we go through it every couple of years, or however time frame we set up, those species can run through that list. They get added if necessary. Or if for example, one of the diseases does come that is harping down on the oaks, we can pull something off of that list. So I think the goal is, unless something catastrophic like that happens, is to revisit it pretty regularly, but create a kind of running list of things to assess at that time. So new species, making connections with new people. So it's possible that, we just introduced 10 new species from, say, Santiago, Chile next time. I don't know. But it's how do we capture that stuff, and how do we revisit it to go through that matrix and kind of bring the working group back together to kind of look at things. But I think that's the goal, is to continually do that. But again, not in a couple of people around the table, more of actual data-driven decision.
Great to hear. And so if I can just respond to that really quick. So I think that through some of the conversation we had here, I think that outside of recommending programs and resources from the city, that we could set up some kind of a subcommittee or do it, maybe the whole committee is involved, but doing kind of the outreaching to our potential partners in the local tribes and regional tribes to try to pull together some information, or people who want to be involved and have input or something like that. I think that would be pretty, and I think it's kind of our job, right? I mean, we're here to provide outreach for you. That's that piece of what we do. And so I think that could be done fairly easily. Taking that next step of like setting up a real program and partnership with tribes, I think that might get more complicated. So just want to put that.
Just one more clarifying question, if I could. Sorry, Charlie, I didn't ask this before. Just losing my radar here. Okay, when you have the list of, there's the recommended after half century, and that list of 6 items, I believe, you guys decided to lump, and I'm just wondering from a policy perspective, when you have to sign off, or Stan, whoever is responsible, to say like, like this, Arbor's checklist that we've been talking about, projects should have this, do they have a check, no check? Does that lumping mean that people, say a developer, can go anywhere on those 3 categories, or is there any motivation for them to go with the highest list that you have the most confidence in, and not combine the recommended, not recommended at this, the recommended and the not recommended at this time? Or?
So those lists were combined because I think we had like a dozen recommended, and they were like all crepe myrtles or something silly. Like it was just like not worth it. And again, I think if it ended up with recommended, and also again, even though species that were recommended, we still were like, oh, but just one thing, just it might need a little extra water, or it might need. So I think we started to look at it as like, there's the phrase right tree, right place, right? But there is also the phrase of there is no perfect tree. So I think our goal was to create this essentially choose your own adventure version of a tree list that provides you like, okay, well, where are you planting? Well, let's go down that avenue, right? So then now you've started into that. And then it's going, okay, well, here are all the species you have. Well, you don't want a big tree, so you're going with a medium one. Okay, so then you're going this way. And then in terms of the recommended versus recommended with reservations, again, we were looking at it as like every tree has some sort of thing that people should be aware of. And so that's where, again, the notes section on our website is so valuably important. So for example, I just dropped one here. So like the hedge maple, right? So it's small, it's slow growing, variable in fall color. It has nice fall color. It does need a lot of water. If that's something that still interests you, again, it has this concern around extreme heat tolerance, which is basically us saying like, hey, if you want this around for a long time, heat is going up. So this isn't going to be a long-term species. So the goal of the list is try to inform people as much as humanly possible, which is again driving them kind of to the website so we can give them as much information as possible. I think we felt like it would do a bit of a disservice by just saying that these 13 trees are recommended with no concerns, because we didn't agree with that. We felt like there was still something we wanted to tell you about it. So that's why we kind of recommended it. To your point, I think that I guess there's an argument to be made whether or not you go to the 50 or 100. I think, again, for those long-lived species, if they were only on the 50, we'd pull them. So it's more of like, can it live a decent life through its time period? So if a developer is picking species, hopefully, again, the goal here is to pick diversity, not only in species, but like the age difference. So not all trees grow to be a 200-year-old oak, right? Like, God forbid, pears only live to be 30, 40 years old, but choose a different species, but what you want is a diversity of those. So when the 30 or 40-year-old trees start to fade, you can replace them. And so that they don't all die like the one street I went to where they're all locusts and are dying at the same time. So you can replace. And so all of a sudden, when the 200-year-old tree dies, you've got a bunch of other trees that were planted 15, 20 years ago, so you have canopy. So I think that's kind of what we were looking at is like, hey, let's give everybody as much information as possible in a digestible way online, and then point them that way through our list. So you could make the argument, but I think because of the way that we looked at the list and chose the species, really, a landscape architect should be looking at like the diversity of age classes and how long they survive. So that takes care of the recommended at 100 or 2050.
Because I'm just thinking that if this is a big list, if you lump things together and it's a big list, the city might not get what it wants out of these designs. Meaning that, maybe there's the top 20, say, you don't want to have to go with the same 20 species of tree. But, you know, if somebody could buy one that's lower on the list for a lot cheaper, or blah, 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 you know, whatever the reason, it just seems it's taking some of the, quote, power, if you will, the decision-making ability all away from you guys saying, hey, you know, we really want you, you know, not to go to, you know, draft pick 256, but we want you to go. Although that worked that well, but, you know, we want you to think about this before you get down to the least recommended.
So, I understood. So, I don't think there's any tree on our don't recommend tree list that we would say we don't want you to plant that. I do think, honestly, I would love for people to go farther down the list, because what ends up happening is that you plant the same 15 species over and over again, because they are in high demand, they're cheap at the nurseries. No offense to landscape architects if there are any in the room, but they have their palette and they're like 15 species and they just copy and paste over and over again. I would love for them to grab a 256 tree. So I think honestly, one of the policies that we've been looking at is forcing people, originally we had talked about, and I don't know if we'll do this, was that a certain percentage of every development needs to be off the experimental list from the city. Now, that would be way too hard to source, but maybe you start forcing them to source the rare trees that we know that you can find, it's more difficult, and say, hey, okay, Brentwood, you're planting 500 trees, 50 of them have to be off the rare species list, so that we can start, one, introducing them, two, all of a sudden we've got little experiment pilot projects going all over the city. So I disagree with you on the exact opposite of, I do want them not picking the top 20 trees that we know will do super well, because we need to diversify. And so to me, I think we want to create policies the exact opposite, which is, hey, start picking tree 256 or whatever, and seeing how that does. Because it might be one that we just don't have a ton of experience with, and it does really, really well.
But unless you, and then I'll stop after this, but for down the road, okay, if you just leave it up to the landscape architect or the developer or whatever, you're probably not going to get what you want. So what I'm trying to say is, could you carve out little things, just exactly what you're talking about, that there's got to be an area where there's some experimental trees, and they have to be monitored by the developer over time to give some information. So when you said that, that was good.
Absolutely, yeah. So so just because this list exists doesn't mean I don't still look at every development plan. So I can crack down on, hey, you're planting too many of this, or I would prefer you to switch out this species. And get real specific, or or in conditions of approvals, I mean, we have Brentwoods, which force the developer to plant 3 native trees throughout the thing. I'm sure we can make it so that they plant, hey, a certain percentage of this, or a certain percentage of this. They do it already with like the UCB, Arboretum, All-Stars, there's a certain percentage that has to be, there's a certain percentage of natives. Doing something to those lines, I can't imagine it would be any different.
Okay, good, thank you.
Could I add a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why having a relational ecosystemic tending and restoration model is convenient, because, you know, it's not just the relationship that the insects and the birds and the rest of the animals that support these trees need to have with these trees, but also, like the gentleman was saying here, it's like it's the relationship of the us as humans that are also building habitats among these trees, and how we're trying to support these trees as well, and whether we know how to take care of the trees around us appropriately, and so there's that component. And of course, developers, if they don't have that sort of consciousness, may not also be thinking in terms of selecting trees that provide good habitat for their development projects, and yeah, so all these are all pieces to that, I think. Yeah, it's kind of exciting.
So just to harp on that a little bit, yeah, so again, going down to like our breakdown of locations is super important. So to what the public commenter made about like olive trees and being problematic, like those are not on our street tree or parking lot list, right? They're in this, so looking at allergens, looking at, again, these concerns are all listed, and they were very specific on why these trees made it to different locational lists. Because we do understand there is this massive relationship. We didn't just get rid of all the native trees because they aren't conducive to us as humans in our urban environment. We found a place for them, right? We looked at all of these different ways that the trees interact with people. We discussed things like toxins, we discussed things like allergens and things like that. So like the list location basis really plays into a lot of these interactions with humans. So.
I love that, yeah, it sounds like this could be a really interesting mapping project, since you are considering the location, and you can consider the waterways and all the other bioregional features within that as well. You can expand that out, and then create very systematic advice and potentially even city codes to determine what's the most appropriate within a certain locale with a lot of different criteria, right? And that would be a very exciting long-term project to figure out.
Thanks. Just my thoughts here. I do agree with the public commenter. I think pollen levels would be a really useful piece of information, either to include as notes or like a low pollen legend icon to stick on some of these. I worked with folks in Stockton where there's really high asthma rates, and that was something that they were particularly interested in integrating. And those same folks would be really interested in seeing how you've approached this. But just overall, just so appreciative of the passion that you brought to this project, the ability to balance a data-intensive approach with also your anecdotal experience. I'm just really impressed by the work that you all have done. So thankful for your time today. Really thankful for the commissioners and your discussion on this item today. I know we've been itching to talk about trees for quite a while since we joined forces for the Climate and Environmental Justice Commission. So thank you all so much.
Guys, it was fantastic. Piece of work.
So I'll close this item with, we're at 8 o'clock, so just a time check there as we move into the next item, which will be a presentation on environmental justice. Stan, would you mind kicking this item off?
So really no presentation to speak of. This was at the commission's request to bring this forward, based on previous work the NRC had done prior to the merge. So we basically located the last draft that we had, including the recommendations that were made. So certainly, where the discussion goes with the commission, this is more, I think, to generate discussion around what the future holds in this arena versus does this commission want to put this forth, right? I mean, that certainly is something you can get toward. I would just say, before you start taking up the discussion, and I think Michelle being one of the subcommittee members might have some thoughts. I think the idea that, when this was done prior to the general plan update being started, if you will. So I think looking at these questions, some of the questions that are in here, across planning and those other things, I think looking at it from a framework of how can these be incorporated into how the general plan evolves, because this commission will be involved in certainly in aspects like this. I think that might be a way to approach the discussion. And then potentially what you'd want to move forward into June if you discuss and have potential recommendations, either time or in June. I think focusing on how this would mesh with the general plan update might be a good way to approach the discussion. Just my thoughts, certainly. And if Michelle had any other thoughts, regarding the previous work, Chair, that'd be up to you to.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. And yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to freak you out about talking about presentation. Then more just, if you could maybe set the stage for the discussion, Stan did perfect. So, and Michelle, I'll ask you to kind of set that stage for the discussion. Then before we really dive into the discussion, I'll ask for public comments on it, and then that can help inform the broader discussion. If you wouldn't mind just setting the stage for us, maybe reviewing, especially for the public's benefit, reviewing kind of what the framework is and any relevant information that will open that up.
Yeah, so I'd say, I'll just say that I don't think that we prepared this framework thinking of the general plan, even though some things definitely will probably overlap. This was definitely looked at more as a process thing versus like a plan that sort of has at least some final milestones, which looks different. And so the idea is that it was going to, first apply to our commission, which was NRC at the time. And then we hoped it would go for public input and get kind of massaged and made better by a lot more people than just a couple of us that put this together, in front of the city council ideally, and then it would also spread to all of the commissions. And so we tried to set it up in a kind of a generic way so that it could be hopefully applied to various commissions and like I said, so looking at it from a process standpoint, it's got these 4 steps looking at when you're just project planning, asking these questions of yourself. I'm not going to read them all, but the idea is that, you're asking, it's sort of making you think about environmental justice as you're planning, and then the next step is kind of making sure that you've actually pulled together data that sort of shows what you found and what you thought about or what you've engaged with. And again, the equitable impacts analysis, kind of the same thing, thinking through, did we analyze this from an environmental justice standpoint and not just from, like, for instance, compared to the presentation we just had. We didn't just think about water and soil, we also thought about people and how they interact and which people. And that's exactly the idea of this, is to just make you think through these questions about whether you've done this kind of work. And then ultimately the accountability, like, did you follow through with the work and think about that? And we did not really define anything of our own. We felt like referring to various things that were already written, that were out there, because this kind of thing can be somewhat dynamic, it can be controversial, and so we provided lots of resources at the end. And I will note, actually I want to say one thing, is that we actually did have an updated version, but it never got posted. I sent it off to Carrie, but then we never had a follow-up meeting, I guess, for it to officially get posted, because there's a couple of errors in this. And one of them is at the very bottom, we had a link to a federal EPA environmental justice webpage, but we all know that's gone. So before we accepted anything, I would have to go back and double check all of these links to make sure that they're actually working now. Now I'm wishing I would have downloaded all those websites. But regardless, there are definitely a lot of state of California stuff that is still in existence and absolutely applicable. One thing that I want to just let you know before we get too deep into this is that on page 2, the very first paragraph, this is one of the things that got, it got messed up somehow in the printing of this. There's a couple of lines that are not supposed to be there. It's sort of like somebody clicked on a word and then replaced the word with many words. And so from the point where it says, the state of California defines environmental justice as fair treatment and meaningful, scratch out all of the rest of that up until where it says DEI, and that should say meaningful involvement, and then it picks up again, of people of all races, cultures, and incomes. So you know that's a little typo that's in there. And unfortunately with that, there was a footnote. And so I just want to read it really quick. And so we had meaningful involvement means people have an opportunity to participate in decisions about activities that may affect their environment and/or health. The public's contribution can influence the regulatory agency's decision, and community concerns will be considered in the decision-making process, and decision makers will seek out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected. So just want to note that those things have not been shown in this document. And so before June, maybe along with whatever else we collect tonight, we'll update all that stuff for a final discussion.
That's perfect. Thank you for kind of starting us off and noting that this might not be like the final version that the Natural Resource Commission landed on. I think either way, we kind of have some places where we can grow to make it better fit this commission's work and then better fit some of the stuff that the city's working on. So now that we've like set the table a little bit, let me pause here. I'd like to open up the public comment for this item and invite any members of the public that would like to come up and comment on this to help our discussion to approach the dais. We'll close public comment after that and then start kind of talking about where we can go from here.
All right. Hello again. I'm Kafir. It's your refresher. So thank you for putting this together, Michelle, and other people I'm guessing worked on this. It's good to have, especially now in terms of the political environment that we're in. I did want to make a few quick comments. One of my concerns is these questions that you pose in the document are great. I'm a bit concerned on once these ideas that get brought up, how do they actually get integrated? And how do they not get set aside when stresses of budget or policy or like resources get constrained? Like, how do we keep these questions, which I think should be core to our values, how do we keep them core to our decision making and not let them slide when other priorities seem to take a minute? So maybe including in that kind of document what the process is going to look like for actually integrating that well. Not just having a document, a million documents you already have to think about, actually thinking about making it very easy to include these questions and maybe narrow down what the most important sections are to make sure that these ideas actually get implemented in our planning process for decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. With that, we'll close public comment and then, yeah, we can move on to a discussion. That's a great place to start too, but Commissioner Gamage, let me start over on your side this time. Do you have any thoughts that thoughts on this side you'd like to share?
So this is a clarifying questions moment?
For this one, I think we can kind of just do it all right now.
Okay.
Since the presentation here, we didn't really have a presentation.
Yeah, well, actually, ironically, all I have are clarifying questions, so I think what I could comment on what the audience member here said, I think we could add a list of planning and executive integration questions, so like there could be another field of questions here in terms of how these questions can have longevity and the weight that they need in terms of just the central planning process. And I think that's part of the conversation in terms of how this is related to the general plan that is being currently worked on. And I had a question about that actually. The general plan is for how many years?
Well, the current City of Davis one is a bit longer in the tooth than is normally recommended. So I believe it's anywhere from 10 to 15 would be a horizon. But it also depends on each agency that puts them forth.
Gotcha. So they will be revisited 10 to 15 years from now. Is that what that means?
Well, that doesn't mean that any aspect of the general plan can't be updated as needed.
Oh.
It's just when you, if you do something or touch it with the effort that it takes for a general plan with CEQA and other aspects, it is a pretty involved effort. So cities tend to do it kind of as a group. But there were components in our general plan that were updated separately over the years.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. So I think part of that consideration is to put in open-ended questions into the general plan in terms of what needs more time for development. Because we just have, these are all research questions because no one really knows the answers to these questions, right? So we need to have a good research approach that allows us to keep answering and developing these questions over time. How to frame that appropriately, I think, should be considered in terms of the general plan, but that having something like climate and environmental justice research approach might be a good way to start. Like, how do we consider this as an ongoing knowledge finding process? And I think doing it from that angle also helps with what the tree, what Charlie's working with, 'cause everything he's trying to do is very experimental, or a big part of it is, experimental. So, putting that here somewhere as well would be good. I'm just thinking out loud. I think that's all I have right now.
Do we go order or no? Okay, a few things, I'll just ask a couple. Obviously, it's a big topic. When we were at the Commission Palooza meeting, sort of exciting going to a Palooza, but it wasn't made very clear whether this was going to be a chapter on its own, whether environmental justice was going to be included in other chapters. There's, for people who got a chance to read it, there's the state put out a document, like 50 pages, on how to include environmental justices in general plans. It's good. It does a lot of repeating, but it shows a lot of work. So I think we have to, figure out what this means in terms of are we going to be looking at it from its own chapter or not? Come up with some ideas to make recommendations. How powerful do we think it would be by itself or dovetailed in, right? One of the things that I'd just like to start with is I read most of the stuff that you sent, or skimmed it, and then I did a lit search on just what environmental justice is. And I get a lot of different points of view, okay? I viewed it in the beginning as that environmental quality can be had by all, regardless, age, gender, nationality, whatever, okay? I didn't really think that things like all affordable housing was part of environmental justice. I wasn't able to, I was ill at that time you guys met on that topic, but I watched it. And there were a lot of questions, there were a lot of comments that, yeah, we think affordable housing is a good thing. I was under the impression that that shouldn't be our thing, to comment on whether it should be or not. There's planning commissions, there's health services commission, there's a lot of commissions that do that. It seemed to me that environmental justice should be that people are getting equal access to a good environment. Now, coming up with, there's lists, there's so many lists going out there, things, what the state said, okay, they're looking at pollutants, right, other parts of town, will students in the Mishi project be exposed to more air pollution, right? That's clearly something. Public facilities, are there enough of them? Like, I know that you guys have commented that maybe the parks and that Davis Farm project were maybe a bit too close to the road, and that those facilities would be better put someplace else. Food access. One of the things they list in the California is safe and sanitary homes, including housing locations and affordability. Personally, I think that for our group to get involved with housing affordability and the need for that, I think it goes way beyond my desire. Anyway, you're talking about access to public transportation, which is all good stuff, civic engagement, risk to climate vulnerability, and all that. I think what we should do, and we can't do it tonight, I think it's going to take a long time to do this, to tell you the truth. Subcommittees and stuff. But just you know, what are things that we, and have a discussion, what are things that we think should be in there? So whether we write a section ourselves or we write sections in conjunction with other chapters, that we know exactly what our sidebars are. You know, I just don't want to drift into things that other commissions should be doing, other groups should be doing, and things that maybe we have no expertise to do. So, that whole thing, and then I'll just add one more point to that, just to end that part of it now, is this whole concept of equity and environmental justice. You know, equity, you know, the big thing there's equality does not equal equity, right? But how does equity and environmental justice all fit together? What's the definition that we want to use? There's a lot of them out there. Everybody has their own, right? So which one do we want to use, and then what are the areas underneath it that we think are important for a general plan, for example, to include?
Michelle, I didn't mean to skip you earlier. Do you want to speak next, or?
I could respond to a few things, but
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. I guess I just want to, based on a lot of your comments, I think a lot of what I'm hearing is with regard to the general plan. Is that
Well,
the way?
I view it as there's individual things and then there's a general plan. So there's two boxes.
So, I mean, like when we're talking affordable housing, it's definitely an environmental justice issue, but is it our commission issue is a whole different question, I think. I actually really don't even know the answer to that question since we've merged, so I'm not quite sure where we're at with it. But when we developed this framework that's before us, we were definitely not considering the general plan in any way. That we were considering, we as this Natural Resources Commission, or we do very similar things still on this commission, you know, thinking about when things are brought to us, for instance, the solid waste, you know, we all love the trash talk, you know. I mean, we could still use this framework as we are having discussions with them and say, oh, did you do this research? Have you done meaningful involvement with the people, let's say, that live in multi-purpose housing, and find out if the bins that you're providing them are working for them. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we were thinking is like things that were brought to us as a commission to think through these questions and to be able to ask ourselves in order to inform the council in a better way that also considers environmental justice. So if we were to set this up for the general plan, I think it would look very, very different and much, much longer. So I just want to say that. And so like in terms of definitions, the other thing, I think we were avoiding doing definitions because definitions are dynamic. It's like our culture is changing, our language is changing, especially rapidly right now. And so to put something in black and white, just as this little old commission, it just felt too far reaching for our purpose and our scope, I guess. So we were trying to rely on a multitude of definitions so that we could all just kind of have a general sense of what we're talking about. So that, I just wanted to say that. Because when we go to, and I know this commission will consider the general plan and have input in that. Next month is my last meeting, so I won't be there. That's why I say you all. But I think it will look different. And so if we're going to consider doing anything with this framework, I would only want it to apply to commissions and their work as a process of their work, if that makes sense.
So that they could incorporate this view of environmental justice in their bag of tools.
Yeah, exactly. And I will also just point out too, we also had a recommendation, and I would have to go back and look at our notes from back in 2024, but we actually made some kind of a motion. But one of the things we discovered in doing this work, at least at the time, and maybe this is different now, the staff didn't have any sort of equity training at that point. So that was one of our recommendations. recommendations, because when the staff brings us stuff, they need to be incorporated in this process and this lens before they bring it to us too, so they're ready to answer our questions. So,
I guess if you don't mind us having
That's great.
again, I'm in colleges, so environment means something to me, right? And so, I mean, I have my own definition of it, but I guess you had said it, and I'm really trying to unravel this on my own mind, to be quite honest with you. Things like affordable housing. I mean, that's very important for the broader environment, as defined as where we live and where groups of plants, animals, species, whatever, live, right? That's the environment. As far as environmental justice, and I was reading a lot of the California things, they seem to focus on environmental laws and making sure that environmental laws apply to everybody and nobody's getting left out. And so I think that's an important thing that we have to discuss, because, and I'm not picking on housing, but that's such a big issue in this town, right? Affordable housing, right? I'm probably going to regret saying this, but I don't know if it's our place as this commission. It's commented on by everybody, citizens, politicians, staff, whatever, concerned citizens. And I don't know if it's the best use of our time to be commenting on things like that. Now, if you want to say, hey, these affordable homes, they're built in clusters that have no parks and no trees for kids, that's a whole different world, right? And I think it's those types of things, do they have access to transportation? And it's not just the typical groups that the state talks about, but it's, somebody's talking about it. It's for homeless, it's for elderly and slipping on the olives. I mean, that's a huge, I live in a senior community, and, it's a big deal, and they're not always traditionally viewed under the environmental justice banner, So I think we need to make sure that banner is big enough, and that we're not spending a lot of time commenting and putting our limited amount of effort onto things that, are really going to have an impact on that, by saying whatever, but more, let's be sure each of these projects, like you have your questions, let's nail those questions down and make sure, and then figure out politically, a lot of us talking about this, how are we going to make them listen to us? How are we actually going to get this to work? And I think that's the biggest job that we have, and maybe the state did us a good favor in making environmental justice now a part of an EIR. I think that's an opportunity that we never had before, ever, right? And so if politicians give you an opportunity to push your point, you don't ask a question, you just run in, right? And so I think this is a really good opportunity for us to have our thoughts on this topic included. But I think there's a lot to be done, thinking about it.
So I just want to say one more thing, is I think that things you're talking about maybe is related to the naming of our committee, being Environmental Justice Committee, but that's not to say that all the other, commissions, excuse me. It's not to say that all the other commissions don't need to consider environmental justice, and I would argue that they absolutely do, right? And just like you said too, that many of our commissions, probably from various perspectives, need to also consider affordable housing. It's kind of the same thing. Maybe not our commission, but there are several commissions probably that touch that one. So,
Well, part of our outreach and education program is to educate the other commissions.
yeah.
Right.
And so that was our hope, is that this framework would be broad enough that it could apply to all of them ideally, if it could get, you know, massaged enough to be generic in a way that it would apply to everybody.
Good, thank you.
Thanks for that. I have 3 things, or maybe 2 things. Don't know how to approach what I have to say, so bear with me, or maybe help me out if you can. One is a perspective on developing a framework for us as a working body, right? So that the next round of commissioners inherit some of that wisdom, and then they can add it, they can change it, right? So basically a long-term plan for this as a commission, right? Especially since you're about to leave us, it's so sad. So if you're leaving a legacy behind, and because of that work that you did in the past, like we can all benefit from that, right? And the last thing I want to see is for every time there's a new round of commissioners, for there to be, you know, just like a huge sudden shift in what, you know, environmental climate, what all this stuff is, right? Because we really are trying to do long-term strategic planning here. Because everything about the climate has to be 10 or 15 years ahead, right? So that vision, that 10 or 15 year ahead vision, is a vision that we really have to sit with together as a commission, and the framework has to frame that in parallel with whatever the city adopts for itself. We can also advise that process, right? And help them create a framework for themselves. They may or may not take our advice, or they may take pieces of it, right? Because they have their own autonomy. They're their own body of decision makers, action takers, and they're resourced in different ways. So, one of the tensions that I see commissions have in relation to the city council and to the staff is that, you know, people kind of step on each other's toes because we tell other bodies what they should be doing, and we need to advise that to a certain degree, but ultimately, how we best approach doing that, I think, is important, and having a good framework for ourselves as an advisory council is very important. And also it allows us to get work done faster. You know, like when we have very good, like, we're on the same page about what we're sitting here to do together. Like, for example, Stan's recommendation to like rethink my motion in terms of issuing a program to more of an advisory capacity, like that really helped me a lot, because I was sitting here thinking about how am I in this capacity support supposed to develop a program that is a very needed program, but, you know, I'm not sitting in the staff chair, or I'm not a city council member. So understanding the right relationship I need to have sitting here within the grand scope of this governing body and how it's related is very important, I think, for us to really consider. And one of the reasons is, you know, if we develop an approach which is aggressive or confrontational, or, you know, then there's always a lot of pushback, and that's going to slow everything down, you know, and that's just not going to help, right? So thinking about that, thinking about our approach as a body, and also, I might add, because we are a body and we have a certain level of autonomy, that's actually where our power and strength is. So we get to decide how we, as a group of 7, 10 people, work together. We can't be told, really, how to do that. I mean, we can be given advice, right? But ultimately, like what we decide going forward is that legacy for ourselves that we can lean on over time. So that's what I wanted to add in terms of that. A framework for ourselves is really important. And then within that framework, we can figure out in what capacity we can best advise the staff and the city council and all these other things, right? So that's that. Okay. I guess maybe we can discuss that before I go into the next bit. The next bit was to address housing affordability, but I don't want to talk about too much at once.
I I would just say that, yeah, we've had the same questions, part of why this hasn't managed to make it through anywhere. Sort of like, how do we start? Where do we send this? How do we get this reviewed? Yeah, how do we get it to other commissions to review? And then the whole commission redo happened and it just made it even more complicated. So yeah, the same thing. I mean, definitely not wanting to move forward with anything until everybody's on board and is cool with it. And like, how does it go to the city council? I don't know. Honestly, I don't have the answer. So
Yeah.
I'm really clueless.
Well, if I can just agree with, I think, a lot of what's been said so far, I think having a frame, using this as like a standing resource for our commission would be a great kind of first step that then we can start. And then I think that could really help our practice as every item that comes to us, we are looking at it through this framework that we try to finalize so that we can use it. And then I think there's maybe two more steps there. There's like using that framework then to generate specific recommendations for an approach in the general plan, whether that's a similar kind of framework or on a structural basis. Maybe that's one outcome. And then the second, or I guess this gets to the third outcome, would then be exploring how we can take this to different audiences being different commissions, city staff, or the city council. I think this resource gives us a really strong foundation for all of those potential outcomes. We can't accomplish any of those outcomes tonight, but I think all of those would then help us to really say like, okay, we put down the framework, built the foundation, how do we apply this in these different contexts, and really, it kind of gets to that like last question of like, are we really putting this into action? And then we can start exploring, if we have this framework, we can start exploring different ways to put it into action. I think something we discussed at the Natural Resource Commission was adding it to the staff reports, having a section that said, had maybe specific environmental justice concerns, or, some trying to figure out how to prompt staff to get to add something like that. And then before I totally lose this, the other thing I'm considering here is how does this framework, I think it's a great idea not to constrain ourselves too closely with the definition of what we think as a commission environmental justice is, and instead try to leave space so that if there's, we want different commissioners to define it in different ways, because I think we get more perspectives that way. So how do we build enough information in there to get it so that we're all kind of understanding what sort of some of the foundation is, but also allow us to maybe if we take a process approach to this, it then allows us, some of us are going to be more focused on the ecological portion of it, some of us might bring a more tribal focus to it, some of us more indigenous focus to it, some of us might work for the Air Resources Board and be experts on it, but it allows us all to kind of like level set a little bit. I could see this occurring like as a series of items in our future meetings. I haven't looked at the long range calendar in some time, but I'd be interested from you all kind of what you think the priorities should be there. Should it be focusing on a framework that we use for our commission? Should it be focusing on the general plan stuff first and trying to adapt it there? Or taking to other commissioners, or do you all have a different way you'd like to approach it in general?
Can I share my thoughts on that? Yeah, so my thought is this. There's a certain amount of autonomy that we have in terms of how we decide to work together moving forward, and whether the city plan, the city plan has its own like central intelligence, right? And so, for example, we could do an enormous amount of work to contribute ideas to the city plan, and then have 2% of it be incorporated into it, right? Because we have no agency in terms of the ultimate decisions there, right? We're just advisory. However, if we devote most of our energy into developing our own system for ourselves, then that will have a legacy. That will be carried forward by other commissioners that come through. And so then that just placing ourselves there will then allow us to have a stronger space to then speak to the city and the general plan as it. And then of course, what we develop for ourselves is itself a governing model for CEJ, and we can just forward that. We just forward that on. Be like, this is what we developed for ourselves. Take from it, And, you know, they'll take what they take from that. So that's kind of my perspective on that. And then also I do like the idea of keeping it a bit open-ended enough to consider how we as a founding commission might not know what CEJ needs to be 5 years from now, really, right? But we need to be flexible to leave it open for future emergent needs.
Just a few thoughts on that. Being a pragmatist, I'm very much in agreement that we don't have to only focus on what people tell us. We have to focus on as a commission. Okay? That to me was one of the big kerfuffling points during this whole reorg. You know, the city council, well, we'll tell you what we want, and the commission's going, well, you know, if you don't know what you want, how could you tell us what you want? And we've had experience with this, so we'd like to tell you, and then you see whether it flies with your needs. So I really don't want it just to become, you know, well, we do nothing until this city council. And I know that's not what anybody's saying here. But I think, well, two parts to it. One is that, so we have to go out and do things on our own as well. And whether they use 1% of it, or no percent, or 100%, I think as commissioners, we're volunteering because we want to see things get better. Now, you know, how the rest of the country votes on something, I can only vote the way I vote, you know, and in fact, the way I vote. So, as a group, we could lay out this whole plan. You know, how do we deal with it within our commission? How should it be dealt with in terms of the general plan? I don't like keep on harping on the general plan, but it is something that the council, during their reorg flurry, you know, they kept on bringing that up. You know, that they want us to go out and do all the outreach, or a lot of outreach, which is something commissions hardly ever do. Right? And they want input on the general plan. I think as a commission, we're obligated to do that, which I'm sure everybody agrees with, right? But we could do other things, and I agree with, and I think this is a lot of saying, and I think I agree, is that there are certain things that we could do that, but at the same time, we could set up this other, you know, and the question is, you know, do we sort of have something for people to read and review and think about it? I always found that meetings, I got a lot further meetings when I wrote out like a 1 or 2 pager. You bring it to a meeting and everybody sort of just is making grammatical comments on what you said. So it's a lot easier to get your point across when they're just looking for, to put some edits to it, you know. It makes it a little more simple if you want to get your point across. So I think we could do both, and I think we have to do both, and they will have to go together as well. It's what it is, right? I mean, the commissions we have to meet with them, get their input on things, how they would like to see it, you know, and all the same time with the general plan and with us, and then how would we use it as our commission? How would we use it in environmental justice? By telling staff or writing a memo to the council saying, you know, you should be doing this for this project, or the play fields are in the middle of a street, you know, that's not good, or, you know, or no buses come. So I think they all have to be done sort of at the same time, or with an eye towards them all combining at the end. But certainly to do things that even though we're not specifically asked, just because, as was said, you know, next 5 years, whatever it is, you know, there's going to be a whole bunch of new people, all in different things perhaps. And so the legacy, not that I care about legacies, but, you know, just leave them something that then they can edit. and see if it makes sense.
Thank you. Just before you start, I'll allow you to add your thoughts to that too. I do want to do a time check though. We're at 8:45. So I think we should start thinking about next steps and how we can continue this conversation, where we want to take it in subsequent meetings too. But please go.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, I think what feels right to me is just to employ a relational ecosystem model for the way we plan. And so one concept is that our approach needs to be sensitive to the habitat that we are in. So we as a council, or as a commission, have a habitat in terms of the larger planning ecosystem, in terms of what the staff is up to and their resources and their time, and the city council and the priorities. So if we're going to build out a sustainable habitat for ourselves, we need to be able to adequately contribute to those other bodies in a way that promotes them and benefits them, right? Otherwise, we're going to become extinct, right? And then, so part of that is that sensitivity to what we're interfacing with. I think it's very important. That should be part of the concept of how we do this framework. And then the other part is also how we can create an autonomous unit that kind of exists outside of just us as commissioners, so that people can come in and take over the work that we start. So those are some thoughts about that. Then I wanted to add very briefly and I do agree, I think this is part of a long conversation we should continue having in the future. In terms of housing affordability, I think there's just there are some dots to connect in terms of how that relates to environment. And so, for example, one quick dot to connect is if you have a neighborhood that has a population that can barely afford rent, you're going to have continuous turnover. Every 6 months, every year, you're going to have a bunch of a new population of people there, and they might not know how to take care of the trees. They might not know how to handle the ecosystem, right? If we're going to have a system that is sensitive to people's understanding of their relationship with the environment as it changes around them, if we want the neighborhood to have any sense of responsibility over taking care of the environment around them, that's learned knowledge. They need to learn that. And if we're constantly having turnover, we're going to have to constantly educate them about resource policy, garbage policy, how to water the trees, all these things, right? And that's going to end up being, over term, a highly resource-intensive endeavor to constantly educate this incoming population because they just can't afford staying here. And so lower income allows people to actually invest their time into the community, invest their time into learning how the trees work and how the regulations work and being part of the planning process overall, right? If they're not sure they're going to be here 3 months from now, they're not going to come to a planning meeting, which is a 5-year perspective, right? So I think housing affordability has a big piece involved in terms of just the ability for people to participate in any form of governance. And of course that relates to the environmental justice piece. The other thing is, me personally, as a commissioner, because my line of work is, not easily funded, I'm self-funding my research work, right? So I have the hardest time, affording rent here in this town, and I go from one, I'm staying at my friend's place because she's, generous enough to have an extra guest room and support an Indigenous scholar, but so what I'm trying to say is that I'm not alone. There's people here that have a lot of knowledge to contribute to the town, but they just can't afford living here, and so they have to, because, I'm here because I love the town, but if I didn't love the town so much, I wouldn't be trying to do that to myself. So those are two things, very real things in terms of housing and the relationship to this commission.
Thank you. I'm still thinking about this in terms of the ecosystem of commissions. I think that's something that's going to stick with me. As we approach the 9 o'clock hour, I think this has been a really productive conversation so far and a start to the conversation. As we look ahead, could I, maybe what we should do, I think your point on it's really helpful to have something in front of us that we can really work on. While I think this environmental justice framework was drafted for a different purpose, I think we could probably use that it was drafted for a different commission, but I think we could use it for that purpose. If we said, like in our June meeting, one of the items is going to be for us as commissioners to sit down and start and work on, have this in front of us and be suggesting changes and kind of working on it live. And then at that point too, we'll have hopefully the full body of new commissioners as well. And we can discuss if we wanted to continue it as full commission discussions, or if we want to take it into a subcommittee discussion. That's where this one came from originally. That would be my recommendation for going forward to make sure we can kind of keep this rolling and start implementing it. Once we finish this framework, then we could then pivot to those other kind of strategies of general plan and creating a strategy on how we incorporate other commissions if we want to do that, if we feel like that's reasonable. How does that plan sound to you all? Sean?
Is that a motion, or?
I don't know if we necessarily need to do a motion. I think we can just talk about it as we get to the long-range calendar.
Okay.
Or now, just kind of roll into the long-range calendar.
Yeah, I think, Jacob, if you're chatting about next steps, if you see consensus, then when we chat about the item, we can better define it for the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe it would be helpful, getting your feedback, I guess, would be great.
I guess my thought would be that maybe Kira and I could take a look at the draft that we have here, update it with some of the known errors that are in there, and also to go through and check these websites and maybe update it for that, and maybe then present it back to you next month as a climate and environmental justice EJ framework. And then you all can decide if you want to adopt it, or if you want to employ it, or if you want to do something different with it.
I think it would really help to have a list, a working list, if you will, of items that fall under the heading of environmental justice. I'm not going to push on any of these things.
Items, meaning items
Meaning
that
like-
our
Like food,
commission considers?
food access, public facilities, health risks. Are certain populations more vulnerable to climate than others? What are the things that we will look at and that we'll comment on during all phases of this? What's the range of things? What are our sideboards? What are the things that we want to look at? Because I think that would also not only help us, but when we go liaise with the other commissions, it gives them some idea of, okay, what is this our group, what do these guys want to do? Are they going to take over everything, or, so I think just to let us know and others in general, what topics fall under, do we want to fall under environmental justice?
Because I have a hard time thinking about that list, because at least when we made this originally, the idea was that we would apply this framework to anything we did. Whatever comes to our commission, whether it's a presentation or a consideration or a consult or whatever, whatever they brought to our commission, we would use this framework to think about how we would give recommendations based on that. So I guess to me, the list of topics is really a bigger question of what does our commission do versus other commissions, and I don't know how to answer that.
But we're called, it's part of our name. We should be able to know what our title means.
Yeah, but I just feel like it's a much bigger topic that maybe you all could consider talking about and trying to list out together, but it's much bigger than this.
And I think
Oh, it is much bigger than that. Let me just interrupt here for a second. But I think it's something that a subcommittee and the group should do. I mean, we, you know, like food access, okay? I would have never thought about that, you know? Making sure that if there is a development, it's not 15 miles away from the local grocery store. I'm not harping on the general plan, but that's a big part of that as well, you know, when you plan new neighborhoods. How close is all this stuff, you know? So food access wouldn't have been something that I would have ever thought about.